Welcome back to the East Coast Recovery Podcast. Episode 4. I think we're getting into the swing of things, aren't we?
Getting into, is that double digits?
Yeah. Not quite. We're nearly there. We're nearly there.
That's at 11, isn't it?
Yeah.
4, yeah.
Well, hopefully soon we can start bringing on some guests as well. We've been working on some bits of software that allow us to do sort of the Zoom calls and record it properly. So fingers crossed. Maybe even next time we'll have a guest on board, which would be exciting.
Yeah.
But there's lots to cover in the meantime. I just wanted to say, I got here a little bit early today, and it was really nice just going for a little bit of a walk around your land and just enjoying the autumn leaves. And it was raining a bit this morning. You could hear the kind of rain.
Yeah, it's been nice to get the mist coming off the fields in the morning. It's beautiful when the sun's coming up.
It's uplifting. And for the past couple of weeks, or about a month now, me and my girlfriend have been getting up in the morning, making our coffee and just going for a little walk. Just about 20 minutes just down to the road, and we just try not to talk about anything negative. Try and say, oh, maybe we're grateful for this, or we had fun doing that. And if we start whinging about stuff, we just give each other a little nudge saying, be grateful this morning. And we don't come from like religious backgrounds, although I think we both sort of appreciate the spiritual side of things. And it's just been really nice to kind of do that. And I was wondering if you have anything like that you might do in the morning. I know AA, that they do, they kind of ingrain these sorts of ideas of having gratitude and taking some time out. And I know exercise is a part of that as well. I was wondering if you do anything like that.
Yeah, well, look, again, it's like we call it our morning stuff. And for years ago, I come up with this idea of 10-10-10, which is because we thought there's 10 minutes reading some spiritual literature or recovery literature, 10 minutes of meditating on what we've read, and then 10 minutes of prayer or setting good intention for your day. And the reason that we did the 10-10-10 was because I kind of thought, well, that's about the minimal, because it's hard to get people to, especially people in recovery, they're very undisciplined, to get them to start setting a discipline. So when we did the courses, we'd kind of hold them to that 10-10-10. And what happened is that most people, each week they come back on the course. It was a 12-week course. Each week they come back. The first thing we did was check if you've done your 10-10-10, have you been to your meetings, have you got a sponsor, have you done all the things you're meant to do. And when I talk like this, I always want to go back a bit further to how it come about, but just for the relevance of it, but I'll keep going on this one. Sure. I ain't got no short stories, unfortunately. And so what we'd find is, what I discovered after doing quite a few of these courses over the years with quite a few hundred people, was you'd realise that when you kind of held them accountable to doing it as part of the course, that they would do it, and they'd all notice an uptake in their mental health, in their emotional life, in their attitude. Because again, it's attitude. It's like great gratitude is great attitude.
Absolutely.
And so, and again, is some information is that Alcoholics Anonymous, after 13 years, when they actually realised themselves what it was and how it kind of worked, they wanted to call it, they realised that calling it Alcoholics Anonymous wasn't a good name because of the word alcoholic. Not because it wasn't good for people to identify at the beginning that they're an alcoholic, but it was because they didn't want to keep promoting the fact that this was an alcohol problem, that this was a mental problem and a spiritual problem. And so they wished they called it Altered Attitudes, AA. I mean, they wanted to call it The Way Out originally, but there was like 14 books with that title already. Yeah. And so our programming, our treatment, we call it Altered Attitudes. And so what the experience we had with sort of holding these people to the 10-10-10 was that after like 6 weeks into the group, I generally stop asking them, have you done your 10-10-10? And I'd leave it 2 or 3 weeks. And after 2 or 3 weeks, then I'd question the group again. Right, who is still doing their 10-10-10? And most of them would say, no, we stopped. And it's like, well, how do you feel? And they would say, man, we notice a difference.
Yeah, I bet.
We notice a difference. I say, right, now start doing it again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what you want, is people to make the connection that it's going to improve their experience if they do this simple stuff. And then again, after a couple of weeks, or the following week, sorry, you'd say, who did it? And they'd all go, yeah, we all did. And we noticed we got better. And again, that's kind of the hope that you'd want people like yourself to realise this actually improves my life experience.
Yeah.
By doing these simple, like we were saying before the podcast, these simple spirit rituals, spirituals, that we find that it improves our being.
Yeah.
And there's no argument for me. It's like, because that's my experience.
Yeah.
So yeah, every day I get up, I like to spend time reading my spiritual literature. I like listening to podcasts along that line.
Yeah.
I try and do as much of it as I can now. So I want to keep my head in that space all day. And again, I'm a pretty angry little ranter who sees the fault in everything and everybody and want to point it out. So my head is very drawn to the negative. And it's not just negative, because again, it's like saying, you know, being unhappy about the gas prices, is that negative?
Yeah, well, you want to fix these problems, don't you?
Well, when I'm being mugged off, yeah. It's not pleasant to allow yourself to be ripped off.
This is something I've realised. If you're just a sponge and you just take in what's given to you, a lot of what is given to you in you know, a lot of media is pretty negative. There's a lot of horrible stuff.
It's very fear-based.
Yeah.
And again, if I can't just listen to that. Again, in the 12-step literature, it says, look, we do a thing called infantry, is that where we do a fourth step. And really, we write down all the things we're resentful at, because it says resentment is the number one offender. It kills more alcoholics than anything else. So being resentful is probably one of the most unhealthy things that I can do emotionally to myself. It's going to cause, it says, hundreds of forms of spiritual, or let's say mental issues for me. So I can't afford to be resentful, which is quite hard in this world.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah.
Because it says, look, the world and the people are quite often wrong. What's going on with the gas, the electric and the bills, it's wrong. There's no getting away from it. We're being mugged off. It's like, this is about profit. You can see it's about profit. It can't not be about profit, because they're making more profit. So how can you tell me it's not profit? And how am I supposed to be happy about that? You're literally scamming me. But it's saying, concluding that the world and the people were wrong was as far as I'm getting. It's not a nice place for me to get stuck. But again, like everything else, it produces a feeling of powerless.
Yeah.
The same as addiction. It's like I feel powerless. That they're taking my power from me, and I don't know what to do about it. So one, it's important for me not to give it my power by ranting about it, but I do need to figure out what am I going to do about it. Now, if I'm happy just to pay the bills, great, but I ain't happy with that. I need to find out, how can I legally go and protest? Because I know the solution is when we all come together, which again is the same solution for the addiction problem. We're powerless, but when we come together, we find that power. How can we all come together? What can I join? So I'm looking at lots of different organisations to see which one that I feel like I line up with, because I want to protest, because it's wrong. And again, what's the worst thing that happened to me is I'm going to lose a bundle of cash this year and next year. But it's a lot worse for other people. And I think most of the people that I'm talking to, they're not happy for themselves, but they are more concerned about the more vulnerable people. There's going to be old people turning their electric off, turning their gas off. It's disgusting. And you know, there's people that are struggling. It's going to be very, very traumatic for them. And again, when we get into this talk, we can look at, you know, some of the problems and the ills that brings society. So it's not something to ignore. And one thing I've realised is that people want to talk about it more this year than they did last year. Last year, they just think you're ranting. This year, they want to have a discussion. That's good. That's a step up.
It is.
It's only when we all say no, it's going to change.
It's difficult, because I want to say, the reason we do these sort of walks in the morning is it's like an attitude of gratitude, like trying to be grateful for for the things that you do have. But it's also really important to be aware of the issues and not just sit there and
don't
take
bury
it.
your head in the sand.
You don't want to,
because ignorance is, well, they say ignorance is bliss, but it's not. It's suffering, and it's kind of ignorance has let us get to this point. Most people want to be in denial, because I think the big problem most people have is they say, "Oh well, there's nothing we can do," and it's like, well, that's not true.
I think it's awareness for both sides, right? It's awareness. You don't want to be taken for a mug, but also you don't want to get lost in that resentment, as you were saying. There's points where you've got to let it go, and there's points where you've got to stand up for yourself.
Well, I think for me, what I'm learning is that I'm a very angry person and have been all my life. Mm-hmm. And people don't really generally want to listen to my anger. That they've often say, look, it's not what you're saying, it's how you say it. So I use a lot of expletives, and it's not right, but it's I always wanted to get a diagnosis of Tourette's, really, because I didn't have to take responsibility. But I try not to swear, but it's so difficult because I get so angry and frustrated. But I think it's how do I respond to this in a healthy manner? Yeah, it's not responding. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to respond angrily, then it's probably best I hold my tongue and stay out of it. So I think it all comes down to responses. So it is my responsibility to do something. It's all of our responsibility. Otherwise, we're giving up our power. Our power is our responsibility. It's one of the amazing things I discovered. I found my freedom through taking responsibility. I thought freedom was not having any. But I've become more free as a human being by taking responsibility. So this is my responsibility. It's not my government's. They don't seem very responsible. I mean, if anything, for me, it shows my government have no teeth at responding. They don't seem to be running my world anymore. Someone else's. So I think it's our responsibility to get together and say, no, we're not paying these other people for ripping us off. Give me a good reason for it and I'll pay you the money. But you making trillions more profit ain't a good reason in my book. No. All you're doing is nicking my hard-earned, and I'm not willing to give it up for that cause. Do a global national health service, I'll pay you another 20% of my income. Yeah. But just so you can have another big pile of cash in your bank? No, sir. No.
It's robbery.
But I want to be able to deal with it without being angry. But I want to be able to deal with it. That's the point. See, the reason, Matt, that's so important to me, when I first learned that in AA, when I did my first 4-step, that wasn't explained to me. That, it was almost like I'm wrong about everything, about being angry. I'm just wrong. It's there's something in you. There was all this deep spiritual stuff people would say to you, like, it's something in you that's making you angry. And it's not true. There's plenty to be angry about in this world. But when I was actually writing the program for my rehab, that's when I realised this says the world and the people are quite often wrong. Look, my parents were wrong. School teachers were wrong. Not that they were completely wrong, I'm not saying that, but the things that they did was wrong. And it was unwholesome and unhealthy for me, and it done me damage. So I have to accept that, and I think it's healthy to say, do you know what? The world and the people are quite often wrong, so let's accept that. You've been wronged. But the way that you're dealing with it or not dealing with it is not healthy. And so I have to learn a healthy way of dealing with it, not ignoring it. Sometimes the best thing to do is I have to accept it. But sometimes I need to change it. It's in our serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity, which is the peace of mind. And this is the real kicker, see, because serenity sounds all spiritual. Acceptance sounds all spiritual. If you're really accepting and serene, everyone's like, oh, you're so spiritual. But that's only the first part of it. It says, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Now that's sometimes difficult for me. I'm a bit of a changer. I like to change the things I can't accept. Yeah. And that's my personality. And a lot of people have that personality. So I have to work on accepting things I can't change. But there's a lot of people that are too accepting. So they're accepting things they should change. Now, it takes courage to change the things that you can. It takes courage to change. It's one of the things that you learn in recovery. It's one of the things that no one taught me. I learned. Mm-hmm. It takes courage to change, especially if you come from a dysfunctional background. You're going to need courage because the other people around you ain't going to want you to change. And the courage doesn't seem as spiritual because changing the things you can is quite hard work. So I've learned in my life, I've accepted a lot of things that I should change because I didn't have the courage to stand up for myself, to find my voice, to speak out. I've had to develop the courage, and I've had to learn to be more accepting of some things. So God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, but I need the courage to change the things I can, and I'm going to need the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
But it's all about change. It's all about, that's what we're experiencing. It's all about, how do I deal with the change? Mm-hmm. And do I accept the change, or do I have to do something to change? And that's the difficult bit.
Mm. Well, this sort of segues quite nicely into the point that we really wanted to get into today, which is the rise of addiction and drug addiction. Because we talk a lot about alcohol addiction, and I know there's a lot of similarities. You know, as you say, it's an addiction problem, as opposed to it just being alcohol or drugs. Now, particularly, it seems like it's on the rise between 16 to 59-year-olds and younger, which we'll get into a little bit as well. Obviously, there's a lot of like socioeconomic pressures, and we're talking a lot about things like the rising gas prices, and this must have an impact on this rise. And I know there's things like funding being cut as well for rehabs. And I was wondering if you could unpack a little bit about why do you think we're seeing an increasing rise in addiction cases?
Well, again, when you sort of sent this over as an idea to discuss today, I kind of thought, well, I've not really got much expertise in young people, but then I remember I was one.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time with young people. And, most other people I know were young once as well. Mm. And so, I started to think about it and thought, because I started to think, oh, well, I'm not an expert in this. And I'm not saying I am now, but I think I've got a point of view that's worthy of a conversation. Mm. In the sense that, so I always look at my own experience to start with, because, I've had quite a colourful life, and I started in a very difficult family that were struggling themselves quite a lot. So, and I was brought up on a council estate with a lot of other children, mostly. Most of my friends were a year older than me or above. And so what I realise is, and working over the last 30 years with quite a few, probably in the thousands of other people that developed addiction problems, you start noticing similarities in people. And so, because this is to deal with like humans and the brain, there's no like exact science, but there's enough evidence for me that the majority of cases this is true. It's not. So you always get someone go, well, that's not true for me. But then there's other reasons. But I think if you go for the majority, you're going to get you in the ballpark. So this is my take on it. That it's no like new thing that young people are doing drugs, because I started on drugs at the age of 9. Not heavy drugs, nicotine, because the boys older than me were already smoking. So because I wanted to fit in and be part of it, I started smoking at 9 years old. Not on a daily basis, but whenever I could get cigarettes, whenever I could get away somewhere to smoke them.
And smoking was a lot more socially acceptable, right, when you were 9?
Not for 9-year-olds. You still get in trouble,
but, yeah.
But, other adults that walked past us wouldn't be so angry. You could easily get adults to go into the shop. I mean, I could pretty much get away with going in the shop and saying they were for my mum for a fair chunk of my childhood. There was a cigarette machine outside our sweet shop. And I remember it was like 10p. I think you got like 8 cigarettes for 10p. But I could go in the shop and buy 1 or 2 at a time as well. And I remember the dilemma that, the jam tarts were 10p, and I love jam tarts. And so when I got 10p, it was a dilemma of buy cigarettes or get the jam tarts. And so I solved the dilemma. I bought the cigarettes and stole the jam tarts, which begun my life of crime, I think. But and they were horrible. Smoking cigarettes were horrible, but it kind of like didn't stop me doing it. And so probably drinking come in very early as well. Again, not every day or alcoholically, but occasionally. There was smoking become kind of a constant, and the drinking was whenever again you could get hold of drink. By the age of 13, I could stand outside the off licence, probably in less than half an hour, get an adult to buy me a bottle of cider. It didn't take long to get somebody to get you alcohol back then. And that was mostly, I guess, weekends when you could say, I'm going to stay at my friends, and we'd all sleep in the woods or break into an old garage and sleep in there. Used to get on the skips, they'd have like lamps, but they were oil, paraffin lamps. So we'd get them and put them in our camps and get a dirty book, 10 number 6, or Park Drive, some jam donuts. You're in heaven, no adults, having a smoke, reading dirty books, messing your brain up. But it was kind of what we did. So by the age of 13, I was already drinking and smoking. And most everybody I knew was. And then one day, I remember coming out my house. It was a summer's day. We had this great field. It was, even though at home it was very strained, it was a beautiful way to grow up. We lived next to a woods, a river. There was fields that we could play, and I spent a lot of time in the woods. Nobody really paid any attention to us, really. We were allowed to do what we want. On one hand, it was fantastic. On the other hand, it sort of makes you grow up rebellious, which I still am. I still don't like being told what to do. And but we had a field where we'd play them football games like 12 hours a day in the summer, cricket. And really, nobody bothered to come and check on us, so we could sit there and smoke and do what we wanted. It was great. But I remember coming out to look for my friends this one day, and I was about 13, and I was walking along the path, and in the flats, I could hear some reggae music and this funny smell. And so I went over to these flats, and these guys were in there, and they were listening to Bob Marley, and they were smoking marijuana, and that was the first introduction to marijuana that I'd had, and I was scared of it. Because everyone made me scared of it. The adults told you it's wrong, and it's, there was this couple called Yvonne and Jed that were hippies that had this beetle with a dragon painted on the side, and they stuck out like a sore thumb with their Afghan coats, and they were proper hippies, and you would see them screaming and shouting and fighting. I think they were on heroin and all kinds of stuff, but I liked them. They were nice. But I walked past this alcove of these flats, and I walked up to them, and they were all laughing, and one of them said, "Do you want to have a puff on this joint?" And I still had the fear, but I still reached out and smoked it. And my life changed. When I look back, I realised that moment my mind changed. That one puff on that joint altered my mind. My mind went from the world and all the dreams and ambitions that I had before that puff. All of a sudden, I seemed to become more concerned about revolution, about uprisings.
Cool. Yeah, we're back. So you were telling us about...
So it wasn't Shepherd's Bush, it was Ladbroke Grove. But again, now I started hanging out with the older guys that had cars, and they were older guys.
Yeah.
and all my friends before that started to kind of drift away, and I'd have to go up Ladbroke Grove, and it was all these rastas, and we'd go down these dark, seedy roads, and then be surrounded by all these guys selling a sensimilla and all that for like a fiver for an eighth. And my life become more about doing that, and by the time I got to 15, I was sort of in pubs and clubs and doing cocaine and amphetamines and smoking and drinking and doing marijuana.
And just built up.
It just kept building up. And again, because you just start getting... It's like literally my life took a complete different direction for that one joint. You know, I don't know whether the cigarettes and the alcohol had started to desensitise me to it. And my home life, you know, I don't know. But what I do know is that a lot of us did that. A lot of my friends. But a lot of them, for some reason, and this is where the talks we do about, you know, are you an alcoholic, are you an addict? You know, given sufficient reason to stop or moderate, some people do. A lot of them guys, they done the drugs I did, they done worse drugs than I did. But once they met a girl, once they got a job, they started to moderate or stop because they had a sufficient reason to do that. For me, it just kept increasing. It just kept, the people were getting narrower and narrower, and I was heading to the bottom of the barrel real quickly. So by the age of 25, I was right at the bottom of the barrel, hanging out with the worst case scenarios. And my life had sort of come to an end through that process. From 9 to 25 was about the beginning and the end of my that process. It changed again at 25 when I come into my first AA meeting. My direction then started to change a bit. Back again, still carried on. It took a, you know, again, that'd be another good podcast. What happens to you when you join recovery? Because you just end up in this world of people in recovery. That's a strange world as well, but you feel like you fit in there.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily a healthy world. And so I think, having said that about my experience, and like most people that I've met with addiction, they all pretty much, it's a pretty similar experience. They start around about 13. So I think most people in our country start having a drink and a smoke round about that. Now again, ultimately, I'm a believer in environment. That environment is really going to be the contributing factor to the way that you live your life to a degree. Again, not an exact science. But again, I think it's often enough to say, you know what, if I got to stand by something, I'm going to stand by this, that your environment is a very important key. If I never was brought up in the environment I was brought up in, if I never got introduced...
Yeah, if you never walked past that house and heard that reggae music... And, you know,
in some environments that wouldn't happen.
No.
It was just the environment I was brought up in lots of things. Everyone was stealing in my environment. So, you know, it took me a long time to realise stealing was wrong. I was taught getting caught's wrong.
Yeah, just normalised it for
Just normalised. So, being a criminal, I thought, you know, it took a long time for me to realise I got a criminal mind. It was hard for me to stop thinking like a criminal because from a young age I was just stealing everything. Never walked past a car without trying the door handle, and that grew into then stealing the cars. Not for joyriding, for selling them, for business, for making money. And then that all, the more money, the more drugs, the less work, the more legal work. I had a lovely garage where I was fixing cars, painting them, spraying them, and I'm really happy there. But the more money I made doing that, the more drugs, the less work, the more stealing. And in the end, we're just stealing cars and selling them. And ringing them, they call it, where we say you jack up the number plates and change the car. There's no repairing, it was just changing the numbers and then selling them. And, you know, then that just all got out of hand. And it was like a real downward spiral. It's like I reached this peak around about 22, and then from 22 to 25, it just was this, just all come to an end, and all started coming undone like a cheap suit.
Mm-hmm.
And but again, I think it was like there was nothing in my environment that I can remember that was able to help me stop. It was only going to Canada and changing environment, and then finding an environment of people like in AA that, and not just in the AA meetings, they become my friends. They were people that I relied on, people that I talked to, people that I started to learn about spirituality from, learning about behaving, learning about how to manage my emotions, which again, that's an ongoing task, and my emotions are not easy to manage.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think none of my family have easily managed emotions. It's damage. Yeah, there's this thing I wanted to bring up, so I'm going to say it now in case we ramble on and don't get a chance to bring it up. But
yeah, please do.
if anyone wants to Google, there's these things called ACEs, and they're Adverse Childhood Experiences, and you can get them off the NHS website, but they're worth learning about. And some of the things that I've read about these ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, now again, I don't believe this is a complete rule, but it gets you in the ballpark. It makes a hell of a lot of sense. It makes enough sense to at least start at this point. And what ACEs are, they give 10 ACEs. And it says that if you have more than 4 of these ACEs, your chances of addiction, health problems, mental health problems, anxieties, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, becoming a victim of violence, becoming a perpetrator of violence, being an abuser, having post-traumatic stress, a lot of the nasties, being a smoker. You know, environment is so important. It's like, look, if we went out now and found 100 families that don't smoke cigarettes, how many of them 100 families do you think children smoke? Probably very few. Because it's not an exact science. So some bugger's going to smoke and ruin it. But the truth is that very few. Now, if we go out there and find 100 families that all smoke, how many of them do you think their children are going to smoke?
Most of them. Exactly.
So environment is pretty key to why there's more people that are young on drugs and alcohol as we talk. It's not about the fuel prices and all that. Whatever existed was already there. The problems were already there. It may exacerbate it and bring it to the surface a lot more, but then people haven't just started drinking all of a sudden. It's been building up and it's spreading. And I think it's spreading because of at least one of the reasons, not completely, but of adverse childhood experiences. So it's saying now if you get 4 out of these 10, your chances of them nasties happening to you can go up to 1,500 times more.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. It's not even like a little chance. It's like, well, again, we know that. We just proved that, didn't we? That if you've got a family of smokers, families of non-smokers, what's the chance of your kids smoking? It's the environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not every kid's going to smoke. Some of the kids are going to go, I don't like it, I don't want to do it, it's wrong. Nan said it didn't, you know, there's always the exceptions to the rules, but it gets you in the ballpark of going, well, that'd be a good place to start. It's pretty complicated, the rest of it, but that's a pretty good place for us to start looking at. So here's the 10. Now, if you get 4 out of 10 of these, then you're going to have these adverse childhood experiences. 1, physical abuse. Now, it doesn't have to be like completely, over the top. It can be quite mild. People that have traumas, it doesn't always even have to be bad, a trauma. It can be quite mild at a very vulnerable time in your life. You might be having a very vulnerable childhood emotional experience, and your dad might just clip you on the head where you think was unfair. That can be quite a traumatic experience if you're in that emotional state at the time it's happening to you. But, most of us, I think, have some sort of physical abuse. Sexual abuse. It's just shocking to me how many people I've met that have been sexually abused. Shocking. It's shocking. Shocking how many people have been abused by their parent and their mum knew.
Wow.
Shocking. It's shocking how many people I've met. Again, mostly I meet people with addiction problems, so it might not be the whole general population, but certainly with people with addiction problems. Emotional abuse. Now, I think pretty much, unless you've got a real enlightened, self-aware family. So again, this doesn't all mean because you come from a poor area. This can all happen no matter how rich your household is.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure most of us have been emotionally abused as children. Even I can tell you where I've been, because now I understand what emotional abuse is. I know I was emotionally abused as a child by parents, emotionally abused by family members, and I've been an abuser. I'm not just a victim, I'm a perpetrator of it as well. I was emotionally abused at school, with my friends. You know, and when you're a little sensitive person like me, it's quite traumatic. Living with somebody who abused drugs. So I think a lot of people have that experience, including myself, whether it could be prescription drugs as well as legal drugs. Living with someone who abused alcohol. Now again, when adults are drunk, they can behave pretty funny.
Yeah.
And they may do funny things when they're drunk, but they might not be like that all the time.
Yeah, my parents used to always argue after they'd had a few drinks.
Which is quite, if you think about it, when you're a child, that's quite traumatic, isn't it? Because it destabilises you, it makes you feel insecure. It can create a lot of anxiety in you when your parents are arguing.
Well, you don't understand because it's not what they would normally do as well. It's confusing when you're a child.
Yeah, and again, it makes you feel that powerless and you don't know what to do, which is two things that you really have to watch for in yourself. Exposure to domestic violence. And I guess that can mean shouting and screaming as well as like punching and hitting and kicking and that sort of thing. People slamming doors, throwing things around. You know, it's extreme. Living with someone who's gone to prison. Living with someone who's serious mental illness, which again, I think that could be a lot of people. They might not be diagnosed with it, but there's a lot of people with very deep emotional and mental disorders. And losing a parent through divorce, death or abandonment. So you can look at them online. They're called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. There's 10 of them. And if you've said yes to 4 of them, then your chances of an increased risk in certain health problems in adults such as cancer, heart disease, as well as increasing the risk of mental health difficulties, violence, and becoming a victim of violence or a perpetrator of violence. I think they need to say that as well. An increased risk in mental health problems such as anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, addiction, diabetes, suicide tendencies, self-harming. It just increases massively. It's not even a tiny little increase. Now, when I sort of read the ACEs, which a lot of professionals use, it doesn't tell you anything you don't know. It just confirms what's kind of obvious, isn't it?
Yeah. Sure.
So if there's an increase in adults with addiction problems, it's because there's an increase in children starting drugs.
Yeah, because the environment.
Well, we're all started as children, pretty much. You don't meet many people that started when they're older. They usually start off smoking. You know, most of the stories I've listened to, there's a great podcast we did, and it's on, where have they been putting out in podcasts?
On Spotify.
Spotify. If you go on Spotify and listen to Kelly's story, you know, you can see quite clearly when she switched. You know, it was an adverse childhood experience, but then you could see her attention switched to smoking and them kind of people that were behaving that way and doing that, and how that sort of led her down a completely different path to her life.
Oh, sorry, that story is on YouTube, but I'll link it in the show notes. So if anyone wants to check it out.
That's a great one for people to listen to, because again, I think we've done about 10 of them, but they really highlight the process that, again, people sort of, I call it the scenery, the outside circumstances may be somewhat different, but the core of the process, the pattern you could see is the same for everybody. You know, it may be a different thing that triggered them off, but So again, I don't think it's all the environment, because I know that, one thing, the arguments you get into about ACEs is like, well, there's a lot of people that had all of that happen to them, but they managed to get on all right. So ultimately, it's true. I believe that. It's ultimately our response to what's happening.
Yeah.
Ultimately. But if we've got no ability to respond.
Well, it's interesting. It's really interesting, of course. But so you spoke recently with the East Anglian Daily Times, and it was about this increase, 34% increase in illegal substances used between 16 to 25-year-olds. So 10% higher than last year, which obviously does sound like a real problem. But I wonder how much of that is offset by the awareness that we have now. Was this a problem anyway? Where do these figures come from? Is it an increase that's something to be worried about, or do you think this is kids have always done this?
Yeah, no. Well, I think kids have always done that. whether it's an increase of, again, I don't know, because again, I don't know what statistics they're totally looking at and how they're coming to them conclusions. So, when you get statistics, you can kind of draw what conclusions that suits you best. But again, based on the model I believe in, which is, that there's something wrong in the centre of the brain, because there's more, I think addiction ultimately is more of a stress problem than anything else, that your brain can't cope with the reality. You become maladjusted to normal life, which is what maladjusted is. You can't cope with normal life experiences. And so you start trying to build in maladjusted ways to survive, which puts you outside of society and puts you outside of your families, puts you outside of good jobs and relationships, and because you can't cope. Your brain's not functioning now in normal parameters. So, I like to put everything back in that model, that the most important environment that any of us have is in between our ears, because all of our life happens between our ears. Your life happens between your ears, my life. So if there's something going on in between the ears, now, again, it's like even being emotionally abused. If nobody emotionally abuses you, but also doesn't emotionally connect with you in any healthy way, that's like an abuse as well. So, if you're in a family where they've got very little emotions, then you're not going to develop emotionally, and that's going to twist you up. So, doing terrible things to somebody's going to twist them up, but not doing anything nice for them and emotionally development is going to twist them up, because they're not going to develop. And so when I think you get a world that we're in now, where the pressure's rising, the stress is rising, so the households the problems are rising, especially in underdeveloped people already. Again, whether they're rich or poor, if you're in a rich family where your dad's completely shut off, your mum's shut off, which is why they are attracted to each other, the stress is rising. They're not coping as good as they used to be able to cope. And in the poorer end of the spectrum and in between, the families are a lot under more pressure. There's going to probably be more frustration. Well, I feel it myself. I feel anxiety. I feel under pressure. I don't know where my life's going at the minute. I've got all these things going on that are troublesome and, it's unsure. But at least I've got some tools to get relief and some, I was joking with my mum. I said, blimey, if I didn't have my program, I'd need medication to suppress how I feel. But thank God that I've got a good program and I've got good sponsors and support around me, that I can manage my condition without the use of medication. Not having to go at anyone that's managing it with medication, but medication changes the way that I think. And I don't know if I can trust that. So in the changing environment, I don't know whether it's increasing in numbers. I just think it's probably increasing it instead of where people are coming undone. Because again, these people, if they're getting these numbers, these are people that are coming into services. Because otherwise they're just guessing.
Yeah. Not every statistics reported.
Yeah.
Right?
So where people were coming into services, they were drinking and using at 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. They're having a good time. it's starting to go bad for them. They're not stopping doing it. So they start turning up in services, and majority is of 24. I don't know if that's the number, but 24, most people around their 30s, 40s before they finally quit. If the pressure's on, then that number's going to go down and down. But I was reading a report this morning that in 94, they moved the number in certain areas of people with heroin problems and opiate problems from 25, it was going down to like 14 when they were noticing it was starting. So again, but that suits what are my experiences. If there's a lot more people on heroin, then 14-year-olds are going to get introduced to it a lot. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of factors. I think the legalisation of drugs, I think there's this massive move to legalisation. So that's, people are listening to that a lot. And when you're doing drugs, you're kind of clocking into them websites that are telling you it should be legal, that you should be able to do your drugs. So
it's like an echo chamber.
I think, well, it becomes like then people feel entitled to do it, and they're entitled to do it younger, and then the more people that do it, the more people are going to get doing it. It's one of the things about legalisation I'm not completely sold on, is that, you know, alcohol's legal and it causes more problem than any drug.
Yeah, there's not the tools to go along with those substances to help people.
The fact that it is illegal stops a lot of people doing it. It's a bit unfortunate for them that are doing it on one hand. On the other hand, nobody ever stopped because things were going well for them. You know, so putting pressure on people not to do drugs might not be the most perfect solution, but I think it actually keeps it down. And if you keep it down, it stops it spreading. There's countries that they don't understand their drug policies. They literally execute drug dealers. And they have less drug problems because they say each drug dealer is going to kill a few hundred other people by spreading the drugs around. So they look at it like they're a cancer. So if they cut them off, then it's not going to spread. Well, I think there's definitely truth to that. The more complacent we get with drugs, the more people die of cigarettes and heroin. A lot more people die of medications and heroin. A lot more people die of alcohol than anything else put together. So all the legal drugs are actually doing far more damage than a lot of the illegal drugs. But the illegal drugs are probably creating a bit more crime because they're illegal, so it shows up statistics. But there's most crimes caused by alcohol. You know, driving, abuse, violence. It's mostly alcohol. So, you know, legalising something is probably going to make more people do it. That's sort of my argument, but I know there's quite a strong polls of views on that. But so I'd say, I think, don't legalise it. I think it actually make it more illegal and make it more punishments. But we need better interventions. And I think that's going to be the ultimate solution, is that it's going to start it starts in the families, it starts in the communities, and this is where it needs to be addressed. You know, if we stop them 100 families smoking, you know, I did this week, funny enough, I'm not just making this up, you know, just having somebody talking, that's in recovery, talking about their kids and saying, mate, but look at your behaviour, that you're telling your kids not to smoke and vape, and look at you. And your kids are going to do it if you're doing it. All that, do what I say, not what I do. What a load of shit. Yeah, it's like, because we know if the families aren't doing it, there's a lot less chance the children are going to be doing it. Again, not a perfect rule. There's other things we need to do, but I think that's a great place to start. It's the environment. What environment you bring in your children up in? What environment were you brought up in? And the emotional environment, the mental environment. Because most people that I meet, the more I've learned from becoming from a very dysfunctional person, I'm not saying I'm not now, but I'm a lot less dysfunctional than I was, but I've learned a lot about what dysfunction is over the years.
Well, you've had this education, you've educated yourself on these matters, you've given yourself these tools, you've acquired
I've had the
these
experience
tools
as well, because again, I've been surrounded by dysfunctional people all my life. So even in my career, I work with alcoholics and addicts. Most of my friends, most of my family are alcoholic and addict. They're dysfunctional people.
Yeah. Well, I hope with things like this podcast that we can start to, you know, enlighten people a little bit about these issues and provide these tools, because I think generally a lot of people don't consider it at all. It's just part of life.
No.
And, you know,
Well,
there's
it is overwhelming, Matt. I think it's what I've learned. It's such overwhelming that most people think being in denial. So most people are trying to live with it rather than fix it. And I think that's just not working. I think we've got to start fixing it now.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to start learning what's dysfunctional, what makes a human being unhealthy. Because it's, again, when you read the ACEs, it's not rocket science. It's obvious. It's happening all over the place in mass in some areas. You go to some areas, it's just mass poverty. And again, it doesn't excuse like the sort of the richer end of the spectrum. You know, they got plenty of emotional, mental problems going on. You hear that a lot on them. You know, my dad gave me everything I could ever want, but he was never there because he couldn't cope with being at home. He was probably a workaholic. You know, it's like, it always comes down to that same thing. It's looking at, you know, the stress. What can you cope with? What's your responses? That's why I love the 12-step program so much. Putting all aside all of the spiritual aspect to it, it's a great tool of measuring your responses. So you can see, well, we can tell what's happening for you by the way you're responding to life, because ultimately that's what you want to be doing. You want to be responding well to life, because that's what's happening to you. It's called life. And you're not responding very well to it because you're blaming everyone else. And the world and the people are quite often wrong. But you've got to look at your part in it, because you can adjust yourself to respond better if you're willing to take responsibility. And people are like, well, I've been molested, how's it my responsibility? I'm not responsible for being molested. It's like, that's true that you're not, and it's terrible. The world and the people are quite often wrong. But you're an adult now, and if you don't take responsibility for your emotional state and your mental state, you're going to carry on responding to the abuse that's not even happened for 20 years. See, what I learned in life is I can have the best excuse to fail, and 7 billion people on planet Earth can agree with me. But that's not going to help me be successful.
No.
I have to act successful and do things that make me successful. If I'm going to be successful, unless you win the lottery. But even then, we've realised that then people don't stay successful very long either.
Yeah. Well, and even then, they've bought a lottery ticket. They've done something.
So it's, I think that's, for me, again, everything I've said isn't a perfect science, and I'm not saying it solve all the problems, but I think it's a great beginning, because again, I think, you know, what I've learned in addiction is that we've learned to do really good interventions for people. And people are just ill-equipped a lot of the time. You know, a lot of people, they don't know how to have good relationships. They don't know how to bring up their children. You know, they really struggle with it because they never had good mirroring. They never had good modelling. They've never seen it done. They don't know. And so a lot of people, I think, don't really even need therapy. I mean, it doesn't hurt. I'm not saying it's I think certain things you need therapy for, but I think a lot of people need personal development. And I believe there's a 98% lack of help for people to personally develop. So we do, you know, groups and courses in, you know, parenting and how to be in a relationship and stuff like that people just don't know. I didn't know. I had to learn it. Somebody had to teach me in my adult life. And I'm still learning. And so good information is a good thing.
All right, we're back.
Back with a cup of tea.
Yeah, coffee for me.
So you were saying early on that what made you decide to go out and do your meditating and clearing your mind in the morning?
Well, my partner Amber, she was getting a bit frustrated at work, and we were just really struggling. We're both not morning people, like at all. We really struggle in the morning. It's sort of, we just snooze and snooze until it's like the last minute. And you know, working from home, we both work from home, which is great, you know, because we can see each other during the day. But you don't have that commute. There's nothing to wake you up, and you can sit there. And we have a morning meeting, the marketing team, and I'm just like sipping my coffee, struggling to open my eyes. And it just sets you up so badly for the rest of the day. Like I know in the morning I'm usually most productive, but that seemed to have stopped. And I kind of realised, like, I'm not getting any sunlight in my eyes. I'm not getting any I'm just doing the bare minimum before I start my working day. I'm a zombie still at that point, you know. And she was kind of getting quite frustrated at work. You know, she does great stuff. She's a participation officer for a charity, so her job is to get feedback from service users who use the charity. You know, people in care and what have you. And she's having quite a lot of frustrations just working with the other departments and just trying to get things through, you know, the bureaucracy of the world. So we both had these kind of, you know, we just both weren't starting our days right, and it's not like us. So we thought, you know what, let's just go for a walk in the morning. Just take our coffee, go for a stroll, and just try and just have a positive start to the day. You know, don't just whinge and look at the news. And like you said, you don't want to bury your head in the sand. But honestly, the improvement it's had, you know, up until sort of 11, 12 o'clock, you know, when I take a bit of a break for lunch, I'm so switched on now. I think it's because I've woken up before I've had a bit of a ritual, you know, and I couldn't recommend it enough to anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to get up about 5 o'clock because I need at least 2 hours, but you're still young, mate. When you get older, it's harder to sleep.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need so much, I don't think, and you go to bed a lot earlier. What time do you go to bed at night?
Try switch off all screens about 10 and then asleep by 11.
Yeah.
And then we get up about 7:30 and then have about half an hour, you know, stroll, coffee.
See, I like at least a couple of hours before. So if I get up at like 5, then I can have a blurry 5 to 6.
Yeah.
I'll probably just have a coffee and, you know, watch some stuff on YouTube, something sort of light art, I like sort of building stuff and things like that sort of thing. And then usually start about 7. Usually start doing me get like me spiritual stuff till about 8, and then at 8 o'clock my life can start around about 8. But by then I'm well awake.
Yeah.
But if I just got to get up and go straight into the day, it's like your brain stays dull for ages.
Oh, it's horrible, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you notice it when you work places and you see people and they kind of get up last minute and, you know, commute sandwich in hand. Just doesn't set you up right for the day. You know,
rushing's never good.
No.
I like to get places early, or like at least outside, than getting. I don't like being late. You know, like old school that way. I like to keep places be there on time or before time. And I've got a Jamaican wife, so she I've had to train her not to be an hour late for everything. No, she's a bit like that as well, but it's like just getting places on time, being a bit more efficient, not rushing. I find it really stresses me out when I'm having to rush.
But that's it. It's just a stress on your day. You know, there's only so many stresses you can take throughout the day, and if one of those stresses is maybe your alarm going off too many times, or you waking up late, or, you know, they say getting up on the wrong side of the bed, you know, by the time you get to the end of the day, you've expended all of the stresses that you've got. Your capacity for stress is peaked at like midday, and it's just downhill from there.
Yeah.
But if you can start it right, if you can start with little to no stress, or even pull that stress back, even maybe you wake up, you've had a bit of a stressful dream. If you can take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, 2 hours, maybe in your case, have a nice
because you can wake up with anxiety. I mean, I dream quite heavily, so I can wake up with a lot of emotions. You mentioned in that, and
you've got to reset a bit, haven't you?
I've got to let it. I've got to detox.
Yeah. If you were to just get up with that anxious feeling and then just rush to work, anxious because you're late, you know, you're just setting yourself up for failure, aren't you?
Well, I am. I think that's one of the things. Is like, you know, we're going about spiritual rituals, but I think, you know, again, I do my prayer, I do my meditation and do my reading, but there is a lot of that stuff is actually knowing how to help manage myself. You know, there's things that I find very stressful, so I find if I prepare for it, like if we're going to move, I'm already ready to go 3 months before I move. I got most things boxed up because I find that makes a very stressful thing a lot more manageable for me. You know, because it is about the management. It all comes down to management. I have this conversation all the time with people. It's about, one, I've never been very good at managing my emotions. And the only way I can not have emotions is take drugs. That don't work for me. So I've had to learn to manage my emotions. And I've got a lot of them, it seems, and they seem to like have a mind of their own. Honestly, sometimes it's really uncomfortable being in my body. My mind can get out of control. And again, I think it's a mental condition. It's not like, I'm 56 years old. I've been doing this for a lot of years. I really work hard at this, and still my emotions can become, I can feel trauma very quickly. And again, in things that happen that have never happened before, things have, I don't think any of us have faced this much difficulty in society. Mm-hmm. And again, we haven't had to face a war, most of us, but I'm sure in a war you've got all this and more, but how are you going to cope with that if it happens? Mm-hmm. Or should I say when? I hope not.
Fingers crossed.
But so learning how to cope with my emotions was one. It's like, having good mental health is learning how to stop doing the things that aren't contributing to my mental health and start doing some other things that will contribute to my mental health. I learned that with my cholesterol. There's things that create high cholesterol that I should probably not eat too much of, but there's also things that break down cholesterol I should eat more of. And so I think that's kind of across the board. So, things like if you've got a lot of anxiety, it's a good chance you're very resentful. So if you learn to be more forgiving and probably do more exercise, at least cardio, getting your heart beating, because I'm very resentful. So I get a lot of anxiety. So the two things I can do straight away is, one, resolve them resentments as quick as I can, so they're not rattling around in my head for the next 3 months, which again can be quite hard when the oil prices are going up and mortgages are going up and blah, blah, blah. But I need to resolve that, because me being resentful doesn't bring the oil prices down. It just makes me sick. And angry, and then it upsets my wife and friends and family, and then I start ranting and swearing and being inappropriate. And it's a full-time job trying to keep my mind and my emotions at a reasonable level. And but learning to do the things that are good for me, which again does take a bit of discipline, and I don't do as many as I probably could or should, but I do enough. And when I'm not doing it, then, like we're saying about the guys on the courses that realise that doing that 10-10-10 for a couple of weeks, try it. Try doing it religiously. Get up in the morning, have your wee, get your cup of tea or coffee, sit down, do 10 minutes reading of spiritual positive literature, 10 minutes meditating. Just don't even have to clear your mind, just think about what you read, and then 10 minutes either praying if you like praying, or setting positive intention for your day. And you see in 2 weeks, stop doing it after 2 weeks for a week, and then start a week later doing it again, you will notice a massive change in your well-being. So there's a lot of simple things we can do. So, even like going on holidays, whatever I find stressful, I've learned to just try and manage it better. And it is nice to have such a good wife that really understands and can help me manage. And I let her give me shit. It helps me. She taught me a great lesson a couple of years ago. I was like stressed out, and I'm having to read this contract for work, and I weren't happy about the contract because it was going to cost me more money. And so it was early in the morning, and I had to get it done. I kind of left it to the last minute, like you do. And she sat down eating a bowl of fruit and fibre. And I'm trying to read this contract, and she's crunching away, and it's almost unbearable. And I said to her, you're getting on my nerves. And she went, you get on your own nerves. But you know what? That was like, I stopped a minute and thought, you're right. I really do get on my own nerves a lot. And then other people bother me. But usually I get on my own nerves. Mm-hmm. I feel grateful for people. I feel like happy for people that can walk away from me. I'm stuck with me. But it's not something I don't sort of choose to be like this. I mean, ultimately, I guess you do. Mm-hmm. But it's something I've had to learn to accept myself. I ain't right. I have to work hard at looking this good. It's not easy, mate. I've got a mental disorder. I've had it, and it's called addiction, which is a terrible name for it. It should be called something else. I've tried to use drugs and alcohol in the past to manage my inability to cope in this world, especially coping with other people. You know, relationships and human dynamics are very, very difficult for some people to cope with, and I'm one of them people. Having relationships is very difficult, especially in the dynamic of a group. That's even worse. I really struggle being involved with groups of people because the dynamic is beyond me, and everybody seems to be on a completely different dynamic than me. And then they start going, well, you're a controller, you're this, you're that. And it's like, well, I don't know what else to do. And I try and be like everybody else, but you realise you're not. I'm not saying I'm better, I'm not saying I'm worse, but we're all different. You know, this year it was like I was thinking about, you know, one of the things over the years that people have said to me most is, and I know it sounds like that a lot of the time when I'm talking, but I mean, I've done a lot of groups and I do work with alcoholics, so you do become a certain way. You have to be effective in treatment, but I guess that bleeds over into your personality and your life, because it's been an all-day, everyday thing for me. It's not really been a normal life in that sense. So I guess I've developed, you know, I think there's certain times through being a professional for drug and alcohol treatment, I think I've had PTSD. I think it's very traumatic working with people with addiction. But over the years, people have said, oh, you know, you think you're right and everyone else is wrong. And again, I know that's not good to think like that. But then I realised this year is like, that's right, I do. I do think everyone else is wrong for me. For me. Not saying you're wrong for you. If you're happy doing that, then have a ball. I'm happy for you. But it might be wrong for me. Or whatever it is that's wrong with me, I really don't enjoy that. And I find it very, very difficult to cope with. And if I don't have to do it, why would I do it? I'm not going to run in a house that's on fire for no reason at all. But if there's a kid in there or someone that needs saving or a decent TV or something, then I can guarantee you I'm going to have a go at running in that house.
Yeah, you need motivation.
Well, it's got to be a decent reason for it. So being in groups of people, I've not got anything against groups of people, except it don't really work for me. Because again, I've got a minority. I've realised I've got a minority view. That I feel like I'm always in the minority of what I want to do. And in a democracy, that don't go too well, being in a minority. It means you never get to do what you want to do if you're in a group of people, because the group usually pretty much all want to do the same thing. And there's not like, sometimes I get my way, sometimes they get their way. So, you know, again, I've become like that with other people. And it's like, yeah, do you know what? People often say to me, you know, what would you do? And I'm like, you're not me, mate. I'll tell you what I would do, but let's look at what works best for you. Let's find out what's going to work best for you, especially from where you're at this point, because you ain't just going to get perfect overnight.
Well, having that mentality to kind of break the mould is clearly something that needs to be translated across to people who, you know, who are still suffering with addiction, right? Because they've got to break down those mental barriers, and, you know, if something they need to get out of that particular group, or be able to say, look, I don't want to go with this. Well,
sometimes you can't leave your family. You know, you get people you got a guy or a woman that have, you know, they've got married to somebody in addiction, they've had children in addiction. So their whole life is built on that. All their relationships are built on that. And then you say, right, now you've got to stop using, but you're also going to have to change. That affects the whole family. It's not easy for them people, because now they've got children that have been brought up very dysfunctional. My heart goes out to people that have had children in their addiction and then tried to get in recovery, and now they've got very damaged children to deal with. That was their fault. Well, at least it's the fault of their illness. It's not easy, mate. It's really not an easy path to follow. And the fact that anyone makes it, and again, I think if you listen to Kelly's story and Sonia's and them people that have had children, and it's amazing. It's amazing what they have to go through to, help put back the harm that their illness has done. Again, because we say it to people, look, when you're actually making amends, part of our program is you need to try and put it right. You need to put the damage right, because it's bad for you. It's obviously on your conscience. But when you're making amends to children, it really should be about, I really regret how much damage my illness has caused you. But there has to be some responsibility taken. Can't be, it's not my fault. And no parent likes to think that they've damaged their children. You can imagine the damage that occurs in addiction. And it's pretty heavy duty, mate. But if the people that actually just come into recovery and don't change, the dysfunction carries on. The people that come into recovery and start looking at their attitudes and changing the way they think, because as they're changing the way they think, they're also starting to change the family environment. And it's that changing environment that can win out in the end. But it takes a tough bird to do that. And when I say bird, I don't mean women, but just person.
Yeah.
It takes a tough person to keep that continuity of change going when you're battling against dysfunctional families, dysfunctional extended families.
I can imagine it's one of those things. Once it's like a snowball, right? It starts off really difficult to build it, and eventually, if you get enough people around you to catch on, you'll start to create this snowball of positivity in this environment. But those first, and that initial clump, that first bit of knowledge, and trying to get that passed on to the next person must be so difficult, especially if maybe they think that you're the problem, and they're not part of it.
Well, that's usually what happens, because you're an extreme problem, that they've got problems, but it pales into insignificance when they're standing next to you, which is why a lot of people get attracted to you if you're an alcoholic and addict. They're enablers. But
makes them look good.
Yeah, and it hides their issues. But as soon as you start getting well, it starts reflecting back on them. A lot of relationships break up when people get in recovery.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I don't really think it's talked about much, that it's not just about giving up drugs. It's like that changes your whole lifestyle. And you could have built a whole life with a drug-soaked brain or an alcohol-soaked brain. Your wife may be there just because she's willing to put up with you while you're drinking and taking drugs. And your kids have been born and brought up by somebody with a drug and alcohol problem. And now you're going to stop doing that, and your mind's going to change. They're all used to being in that relationship with that person. It is. I mean, I was out of the country for 3 years when I got in recovery, so I'd changed 3 years before anyone met me that I knew from my past. So they hadn't seen me since I was 25. So when I come back at 28, they was shocked. Like, really, it was profound. They were like, "We don't know who you are. You look like Lester, but you're like someone else." It's like I'd had a body transplant or something. In the end, my friends, they had a meeting, and one of them come round my house, knocked on the door. He said, "We've had a meeting about you." Now, these are like not people you'd think have a meeting about me or anything, apart from what drugs to go and buy and how much they're going to all chip in. But he said, "Look, we've had a meeting. We don't know whether you want us hanging out with us anymore. You make us all feel uncomfortable." I said, "I don't say anything. I'm not judging you." He said, "Yeah, we know that, but when you're standing there and we're all using drugs, we all got families. We know what we're doing is wrong. But when you're not there, we don't think about it. It's like you almost become their conscience."
Yeah.
And so he said, we agreed that I had to go home at 10:30. And as he left, he went, "The last person that was as good as you, they took him out of town and nailed him on a tree." He said. I said, "Mate, because I don't want to be racist anymore. I don't want to do drugs, and I don't want to lie, and I don't want to steal."
Yeah.
But they're like, "Yeah, but it makes us feel like you think you're better than us. Because you don't want to steal.
Yeah.
You don't want to deal with stolen goods. It makes us feel you think you're better than us." And that's one of the big problems I've faced, is that.
Just as an example, you showed them the faults.
Man, it's like you just become a reflector.
Yeah.
And again, there's this bit in the Bible that says, I think it's in a bit of the Bible, John 3 or something like that, where it says that people practicing evil, and evil would be like sort of that stuff, that they don't like to come into the light lest their deeds are exposed. So when you don't want to do anything wrong around people that are doing wrong, you make them feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
That's the principle. And so when you sort of build your whole life around people with drugs and alcohol, and then all of a sudden you're not doing it and they are, you don't want to, and you're in a program that's saying you've got to be honest and change and a bit more virtuous and blah, blah, blah. And you start realising that yourself, that I don't want to be this person anymore. That you start making the changes, and it starts having a massive effect with the people around you. So I think that's why you end up then going to AA meetings and NA and things like that, and you start hanging out with all them people. Because they're all the same. They got no one else to hang out with anymore.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to hang out with the other people, and the other people don't want to hang out with them. And that's a lot of it is your family as well. So they're struggling in their families.
And that's the importance of finding those people around you, finding those groups. And, for anybody listening, obviously there's Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, but I will put some links. And going forwards, I think I'll put links in the show notes every time for these sorts of groups. And,
I think
support.
even good links for like adult children of alcoholics and stuff like that, and some links to our websites for people that might feel they need some therapy or want to come on some groups and that kind of thing, that they can check out what we're doing. Yeah,
there's lots of support out there, and we do free assessments as well. So if you just want to talk through it, it might be an issue that you're having or somebody you know is having. Just give us a call. We'll put the number in the show notes, and we're happy to chat through it, and we can always find solutions. The first step is really reaching out.
That's the good news. Recovery's possible.
Yeah,
there is solutions if you're willing to work for it.
Was it you wanna?
Oh yeah, that's what we said in that earlier. That some people they don't wanna, some people wanna. So as long as we got you as a wanna change, you're on the right path. But it's not easy, and it is like a whole other world. It really is like another world.
And we're going to be back because there's obviously lots more to talk about. I hope we can get Kelly on as well, because her story is super emotive, and I think a lot of people might be able to resonate with that.
Maybe see if we can get Kelly next week.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Lester.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. God bless.
Catch you next time.